Madison Jacobs, welcome to Keys to Success.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for having me today.
I am well. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. I wanted to kind of start off with what is your current position?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because I'm in kind of in flux right now. But currently, I'm actually spending the next month out of an entire 10-week fellowship that I've been involved in through the Aspen Institute. I'm a fellow at the Aspen Tech Policy Hub, and what that means is I am a technologist that's come into this fellowship to work on policy issues in the technology space. So essentially that's branded as technology policy, but I'm working on learning about the policymaking process and how that relates to technology, and how we should bring more technologists into the policymaking process. The project that I'm working on for the Aspen Tech Policy Hub is around mitigating racial bias in education technologies. And essentially what that means is there's a lot of education technologies that are starting to pop up in schools all over the US. Many of those technologies are leveraging artificial intelligence and or machine learning. The way that machines learn is based on the data that's fed into them. And so because, traditionally the education system has been biased towards Black and Brown students, a lot of the data that lives in the education system is sort of already encoded with bias. And so as we start to take that data and plug it into systems that are processing it, computers per se, we just perpetuate that already existing bias. And so here at the Hub, I'm working on technological and advocacy solutions and also policy levers on how we can better regulate this space and help to create more equitable outcomes for Black and Brown students in K through 12 schools in America.
Wow.
So that's my current thing that I'm doing now.
Right.
But I'm actually on leave from Google, where I operate as an editor in chief of Google for Startups, which is a team at Google who is tasked with sort of leveling the playing field for startup founders across the world. My purview specifically, and a lot of the programs that I work on at Google, in addition to helping us market the way that Google the way that Google helps startups in the ecosystem from the tech tools that we offer and the sort of access to knowledge banks that we have on different things from how to hire or how to create specific tech stack at your company, for an example. I work a lot on programs that are designed to help Black founders succeed. So mentorship programs, access to capital programs, a lot of different things in that segment because I'm passionate about economic development, particularly that of entrepreneurship in the Black community.
Awesome. Awesome. Wow. That's a lot.
It is.
Um,
It is a lot.
so before we get into that, because I have a few questions based off of what you just explained to me. But before we get into that, let's learn a little bit about your history. Um, I read in your bio that you are from Arizona. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm actually originally from Indiana.
Okay.
I grew up in the Midwest, in Fort Wayne, and I moved to Arizona when I was like a, probably 10 or 11 years old. My grandparents were entrepreneurs. My mom was an entrepreneur. My uncle is an entrepreneur. But my mom had a business, a fitness business, and she had an opportunity in Arizona. So we actually relocated from Indiana to Arizona. So I came to the West Coast.
Mhm.
That was quite a long time ago, like obviously over 20 years ago. And I went to high school and college. I went to Arizona State, and got a degree in journalism from the Walter Cronkite School there at ASU,
Nice.
and stayed in Arizona for a couple of years as I started my career in technology marketing. And then I moved to San Francisco, which is where I live now, about 6.5 years ago.
Okay. Um, so what inspired you to get into this business that you're in now?
Yeah, definitely. Oh man, that's a tough question. I'm like, what did I feel like this is one of those questions you get asked and you're kind of like, wow, that's like synthesizing my a large part of my life. But this is how I tell the story because I am a storyteller. That's what I love to do. My first passion is writing. Like my first
Right.
passion is literally taking things that are complex and putting explanation and words around them to create a story from that. And that's what
Awesome.
I love to do fundamentally. And that's what I seek to do in every venture that I take on. And that's kind of like my innate sort of God-given Madison skill. But when I was in college, I had a professor, her name is Leslie Wayne. She's actually a New York Times reporter for, I think she just celebrated her 39th year at the New York Times. And she really just sort of awoken this interesting interest in me when I was in journalism school about technology. And I remember doing a lot of things when I was in college, like that were focused on writing because I was practicing, practicing on learning how to become a journalist and do that as a job. But I always loved and was super interested in technology since I was a kid, and was always like the nerdy kid that was like playing computer games and getting in trouble because once upon a time when you was on the internet, you couldn't also use the phone. Right. And so like my mom was like, you're going to have to get off the computer games so I could use the phone. And so I was that kid. Right.
Wow.
And so was in journalism school, she was like, really piqued encouraged me to continue to follow that interest. And so what I realized was that there was a lot of technology companies that were starting to pop up. This was back in the early 2000s, well before kind of like this common understanding, at least in the tech ecosystem, of startups and, this sort of large scale of creation of small companies that are building technologies to kind of change and revolutionize the world. This is like, pre a lot of the things that we deal with today. Like I was on the first ever round of Facebook as a thing. Like I had to use my .edu email address to log into Facebook.
Wow.
Once upon a time, you had to be in college to use Facebook. You couldn't just be anybody. So
Okay.
there was this whole sort of like tech startup industry was very new. And there was a function within that was really interesting to me. And it was like, how do people actually want to use these products? Like, why would anybody want to use Facebook, or why would anybody want to use AIM or Google or Firefox or whatever all the different things are? And I got really interested in using my practice of writing and the skills that I had adopted in journalism school to essentially bring that to the business sector as a function for helping customers understand the benefits that they receive when they use a product or solution or a product or service. Like, what is the solution that they actually benefit from? Not just how the product or service work, but how does it solve a problem that they're looking to solve in their lives? And that requires someone who can think about, synthesize information, and use words to explain that. And ironically, that's really the function of journalism as a practice, right? You're seeing something and you're writing a story about it so that you can educate others on what has happened. And why they should care about it, and why it should be something that they should know about, and why it's important to them. And so that's kind of how I got into the track of working in what we call in the technology industry is kind of product marketing, or content marketing is really what my core specialty is in. And then I got really interested in how can you automate this whole process of like acquiring customers using a narrative that you've developed for a brand. And so then I got into building sort of automation frameworks and the practice of demand generation for business, which is really how do you acquire customers and how do you get those customers to continue to buy your product or service over time. Most of my career I've spent working in content marketing for like SaaS companies or subscription-based service companies. So a lot of that requires understanding how the relationship with the customer evolves over time, and how you can use points in the marketing funnel or sales funnel to continue to foster that conversation and make it stronger, so you can get them to become your customer, but then also sustain it over time as you want them to keep coming back and utilizing your product or service. So that's kind of how I got to where I'm in now, and what's inspired me to continue to do the work that I do in sales and marketing for technology companies.
Wow. So do you, when you're creating, I would say, a marketing plan for a company, if that's for lack of better terms, what do you find is the key point that attracts people to? Is there like a reoccurring theme that attracts people to people's products, like in people's mind? What would you say?
Totally, yeah. So I think that there's a really interesting, I mean, that answer is different for every product or service, but when I think about it fundamentally, for me, I think about the story of a company sort of in two. Let's just use a startup, for example. Like,
Right.
let's use a smaller company. I think of the story of the company in sort of two facets. One is the personal story of the founders and or founders, and how that is involved in the larger sort of arc of the telling the story. And then one is the business story. The business story is, why does this thing, why does this solution, why does this product or service that you're creating solve a problem for the person that you want to use it, right? And being very, very clear on what that is and very creative around how you tell that story is what I think gives companies, especially that are playing in a highly competitive space, advantage. I think the personal story is very important, though, because it becomes the catalyst or the sort of underpinning to the business story. So that's kind of how I think about companies that I feel like, as they sit down and think about, hey, how do I create a marketing plan? First and foremost, your user is this cornerstone of anything that you're thinking about saying in the world externally about your company. Knowing and understanding your user intimately is the first step in the entire process. And then once you do that and you understand what needs that they're looking to meet, you're thinking, how can I talk about my product or service as a solution to meeting those needs? That's my business story. And then how can I use my personal story to underpin that and let my customers know why I'm the one to build this product or solution for them?
Wow. So do you find it difficult to do that for different products, or is it, I mean, can you explain the difficulty of it?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for sure, it's definitely difficult. It's kind of like, so if, for example, if you have a consumer product that you can touch and see and feel, like, iPhone or AirPods or whatever,
Hmm.
it's much easier to think about the process in which it affects like a single human being, right? This is like the B2C marketing model, right? Which is significantly different than the B2B marketing model, or even like the B2B2C marketing model, which I'll talk a little bit about those two different things. But in a B2C model, you're dealing with something that like is impacting a person on an individual level. So I think it's there's a gift and a curse there. It's quite difficult to create marketing plans in that space because it's like you're trying to talk individually, but in an aggregate to all of these different kinds of people, right? Because all different kinds of people use iPhones,
Hmm.
but fundamentally an iPhone is the same.
Right.
Right. So how do you make something that is the same speak differently to so many different types of people? So that's a really hard process to do. But I think it's actually, I enjoy that the most because I think that's where you can get so much more personal and conversational in the way that you use marketing to tell your business story and tell your personal story to help support your business story. I do think when you're thinking about B2B, I think it's significantly harder to create marketing for like a product that you're selling to businesses in a way, because although you want to always find a way to, many times in B2B sales and marketing, you're still targeting a persona within a company or a user within a company.
Hmm.
So you're using sort of B2C marketing methods in those conversations. You still can't like pick up Facebook and hold it,
Right.
or Facebook's a consumer tool, but you can't pick up like Salesforce and like, as a Salesforce is like a business use tool for large companies. You can't pick that up and
Right.
like, look at it and hold it in your hands.
Mm.
So it's a completely different way of thinking on how you're actually talking about how that product is going to make change within not just a person's life, but an entire industry. I had the privilege of working on content marketing initiatives for a couple of years with a company called Apigee, which I still loved, like near and dear to my heart to this day. Apigee was acquired by Google Cloud in 2016, but I worked for the company before we were acquired by Google, and I loved working there so much because a lot of the way that we talked about why the solution that we were offering, we worked in the application programming interface business. I know that's like a very technical term, but to boil it down, basically we worked in the business of helping people manage their APIs, and APIs are things that really just connect two services together. So an API is how you pull information from one database and send it to another. And that's not anything that someone could see or feel. And, managing those is important for security reasons, for scale reasons, for so many other things, but we're not selling the features of what the tool does. We want to sell the vision of the future. And what that is digital transformation, right? So our marketing wasn't about like how the code worked and how the tools worked and how all of that. I mean, that's one part of it. But the larger marketing story is when you develop, software, you think about using your services in this way, you actually become a company that is like transforming in your industry and can provide a more innovative experience for your customers. So for example, if you take like a retailer, they are using a product like that to enable the ability for someone to order something online and then pick it up at the curb. Right. And that's what we're selling. We're actually selling like, this isn't about, the technology. This is about how the technology empowers a better experience for your customers that want to shop online and then just drive down to Target real quick and pick it up without having to like get out of their car. So there's like, a really interesting way that you can think about how you're really thinking about it as the solution model and thinking about it as that. So in both ways, you're still thinking about this, how to sell on the solution, but versus the product or service, but it's just a different audience. And so there's different pros and cons in both of those spaces. And then the B2B2C example I gave, is like you're selling to a business who's then selling to a customer. And so you have to think a lot about how you're talking to them to adopt the thing that you want them to use, because it's going to help them serve their customer better, right? So there's a very interesting way that you can think about marketing plans inside of in kind of those three contexts. And so I guess that was a long-winded answer, but the short, I say all of that to say that it's kind of, there's pros and cons in each area, but understanding what business you're playing in and really understanding your user is the main way that you get to where you need to get to in those terms.
Wow. Okay. What, if any, outlooks do you have on the trends in your business field? Are there any trends that you see lately?
Wow. That's a big question in technology.
Yeah.
That's like, basically, there's a new trend as we're talking right now.
Right.
But I guess I'll speak to what is very interesting to me personally, and what I'm excited to see develop over time. So I'm really interested in seeing how the industry of augmented reality and virtual reality is going to find its way into the mainstream. I think that for pretty much the beginning of time, those types of technologies, call it like the Google Glass or augmented reality that's happening with like Pokemon Go or Snapchat or all these things are just kind of the first versions of this that an everyday person is seeing. But I think there's so many interesting ways that these things can be used in the world. And I also am interested to see what happens ethically with this kind of stuff. Like who, if you're thinking about like virtual reality or like kind of like a world that has lived mostly in gaming,
Mm,
right?
mm,
Like there's people that put on headsets and then they play a game and they're in this like world and it's cool and then they get out of it. Well, what happens when you're using that in like a business setting
right.
and then somebody like feels like it's too real and something bad actually happens to someone in real life?
Mm,
Whose responsibility is to like regulate what happened within that space, right?
wow.
Like, so I just think there's like kind of interesting thinking about what are the ways that that's going to kind of come to be. And I think companies like Google, companies like Microsoft working on amazing things like Daydream, the team at Google that's working on a ton of augmented reality and virtual reality. They're doing really interesting work in Google Maps, like where, you're able to pull up Google Maps and then you're able to see like an arrow that is sort of augmented on the sidewalk, right? And it's
Wow.
directing you in a certain direction. Or there's going to be more use cases that I think that are going to come out. And so I'm really interested to watch that kind of birth itself over time in the tech industry. But the gift and the curse, I think, of technology is the rapid pace in which it moves. I
Mm,
think the ideology is to just build and deploy and just fix stuff as you see it's broken.
right.
And the reason why I care about that is for several reasons, but on a personal level, that's why in so many ways I think that we do get equity wrong and that we do get inclusion wrong, because you have a certain set or type of people that are developing a technology. And when you're not bringing in diverse perspectives and voices and situational things into that, you get products that are very and experiences from those products that are very one dimensional. And I don't think always serve the majority of people that they're actually looking to serve. And so while I think tech is the place where you can kind of have this mentality of like versus like government, where maybe you're thinking more like methodically about all of these processes. This is the mentality where you can come in and say, I have this idea, I'm going to shake it up, and then I'm just going to put this out there.
Right.
There's implications to that as well. So I think over time, also just in tech as a whole, emerging technologies is my first answer, but my second is just seeing how the industry evolves and how we work together to get better at equity and how we work to get better at inclusion. And if that movement will continue to gain momentum. It's got a little traction, right? Like
Hmm.
we're like in the place where we're like, okay, maybe we should like make sure that we have Black people and brown people testing this camera so that it works for them.
Right.
We're there, right? But there's a whole different, I think, adoption of a mindset that needs to be had in tech. And so I'm fighting that good fight and hoping that we make more progress on that.
When you talk about equity and inclusion, you just touched on that. What are some of the biggest challenges for minorities in the business that you've seen? And not only minorities,
Mm,
the second prong to that question would be, as a minority woman in the field that you're in, what are some of the roadblocks or challenges that you've seen, if any?
mm, mm. Okay, right. So I will give actually my first response to this question, which is I'm actually in my personal vocabulary as a Black woman trying to stop using the word minority because I think it already has a negative connotation. And I would like us as a community to start identifying ourselves differently. Um, Problem number one, or opportunity number one, I should
Right,
say.
right.
I think that so I'll speak about this from two sides in the world of technology. I'll speak about it from the side of culture, and I'll speak about it from the side of how culture informs product, right? So those are two separate things. Culture, meaning the culture of technology companies, how those companies, the people that work within those companies, the ideologies of the people that work within those companies, and then also how that informs the way that the products that those companies create, build, and deploy, right? So, and this is agnostic of like a Google or whatever, like call it any big tech company. Like I think a way to refer to it is like FANG, which is like Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, right? This is like
Wow.
the big
Okay.
techs, right?
Right.
And I think that the hardest thing about culture at a company that's so large, like at Google, it's, hundreds, like over, I don't know, it's probably at this point 120,000 employees. Maybe I'm totally quoting that wrong. I'm sorry, Google, if I'm getting that wrong, but there's over 100,000 employees at Google.
Right.
And still a very small percentage of those people are Black and brown people. And we do this event at Google that is very magical. It's called the State of Black Women. It happens once a year. All the Black women that work at Google come into one room at the company. It's an auditorium, don't get me wrong, right?
Okay,
it can fit a decent amount of people, but it's not tens of thousands. It's not even thousands. It's hundreds, right? In 110,000 person company. So that just gives you the perspective on what is a Black female voice? What power does it have at a company like a Google? And I think that the largest issue that we're facing that is starting to come to light, and so many conversations are starting to be had because of some amazing champions in the space of tech that are fighting the hard fight internally for equity and inclusion, is we don't even have enough people at these companies to represent the world in which we built for. Right? The technology company that's building for a world that is more diverse and growing populations of Black and brown folks only has like 2% Black people working there.
Wow.
That's a problem. So I think the culture in which technology has been created, technology companies, has very much belonged to like the white population and sort of the middle-aged white male population. Like that is how the industry was sort of birthed. That's how its ideologies have kind of been created. Not to say that that doesn't mean that so much, good has come of that, but we're really challenged on how do we think about building culture that includes everyone. And so I think that's a big challenge that we have because it's not something that gets solved in a day. I think there's a lot of people that think, oh, well, we just hire some more Black and brown people and we just, give them some free lunch and some LaCroix and like a massage and everybody's happy and like we're all good. And it's like, yes, please believe, like as a Black person that works at Google, I'm a highly privileged individual with the resources and access that I have, right? I'm gonna check that on this interview right now. I haven't been in that state my whole life. I don't come from that background, but I understand that gives me a different agency and privilege in the world. What I think is that there's a lot of people that think that it's an easy fix and you can just, if you just give more opportunities, or if you just find the right people and you just plug them in, then everything's good. That's really where I think diversity and inclusion from a culture perspective fails at tech companies because they want to solve for diversity, which is just the diversification of assets. If assets are people, that means if you have 10 people that are one way, you're going to insert 5 people that are different so that you have you're going to make of the 10 people diverse, whether that is racially diverse or gender diversity or sexual orientation diversity, whatever. You're just going to fix for that and check the box and we're done. But that doesn't address what is actually the biggest part of the entire process, which is inclusion, which is the process and practice of making people that feel different feel like they can be themselves at all stages of the day. Inclusion is a very hard thing to solve for when we're the people that are sort of, there's not enough people that we can come together with and figure out how do we create a different culture. So we don't have enough diversity. Therefore, it's harder for us to think about inclusion more effectively because you need more voices to inform what inclusion looks like, right? So there's like it's this two-pronged problem that's happening. And I think a lot of people, at least in the technology industry and conversations that I've had and experiences that I've been through, are kind of just like, yeah, we need to just, if we can just check the box and we fix the problem. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, like technology isn't going to fix systemic racism We can't, we're not like, so we're not like a lot of, I think also the mindset of tech is like, tech is the thing that comes in and like changes the world and changes everything. That's like what tech is.
Right.
But there are things that tech cannot solve. There are things that only people and the righteousness of people can solve. So it's very hard to predict for that. It's very hard to create models for that. It's very hard to do that scalably and systematically. We see that in every aspect of life where Black and brown people are underserved. We are underserved in technology companies. We are underserved in schools. We are underserved in our communities. We are underserved in how we are paid. We are underserved in opportunities for employment. We are underserved because we go on a pipeline that moves from schools into prisons, right? We're underserved because we're sitting in classrooms with teachers that don't look like us, learning in books of stories that are not about us, right? So this isn't something that tech is going to solve.
Right.
But I think the more that people in our community can come into these spaces and be authentic, the more that we can start to create this conversation that actually fixes what is the problem of inclusion versus just the problem of getting a bunch of different people into a room, because that doesn't really solve for anything, in my opinion. You open the door, but making people want to sit down and stay is a different process.
Wow.
So that's on the culture side.
Right.
Really quickly on the product side,
Absolutely.
that all involves like, we need more product inclusion in technology. We need more functions for products, especially consumer products like the phone or like these headphones, all these things to be deployed and tested and get feedback from all different kinds of people so that we can just build products that are better for everybody. And that's, I think, some companies do that better than others. I think nobody gets it perfect. Nobody's ever going to be perfect. But I think the more that we just are insistent about making sure that that's a practice that we want to mandate and not just choose to do, the better that we get in creating products that actually serve all people.
Wow. That was.
Was that a good answer?
Yeah, that was that was pretty deep.
Yeah.
You were preaching there for a minute. I was.
I know. Sometimes I'm the person at church who's like, I like the high notes at church. Like I like when you start standing up and clapping. So
Absolutely.
when I get passionate about things, I speak in that way as well.
Man.
And I'll give a shout out also to my church. I go to Vibe Church in San Francisco, led by our campus pastors, Pastor Bob and Terry. I love you guys. But yeah, so I think that, and passion, right? Black people, we have passion.
Mm-hmm.
We have passion that is so reminiscent of who we are as individuals, as a community, as a movement, as a culture, as all the things that so many other people want to get a taste of and emulate. That the more that we can bring our culture and its authenticity to the spaces which it hasn't belonged before and to create agency for ourselves, the better that we do for those in the world that do not have the access and agency that we do in terms of Black folks working in tech. I feel it is my personal duty as Madison, not as Google employee, to do this work, because when I do this work, another young Black girl can look at me and say, I can do that, and I can be that, and I can be a writer that wants to go and work in tech, and I can become a founder, I can start a business, and I can do so many things. And creating that path and being ready to, how I see it is also being ready to not knowing that it's going to happen, or not knowing theoretically that you're going to have to do this, but being ready to have that ladder and that reach back or that reach down.
Right.
I think is a core to how I think about how I move and how I move in spaces and what I want to do next and how I empower those that are going to come after me and how I lean on those that have come before me.
Wow. So do you have anything outside of Google that you're working on right now to kind of encapsulate everything that you just said?
Dang! Oh my gosh, yeah, too many projects. But I think, yeah. So what I'm working on at Aspen, very passionate about. Right now, you can follow our journey that we're developing at Aspen. I actually have a partner for my project, who's amazing. Her name is Nidhi. She worked on education technology products at Apple for several years, and is just one of the best human beings I know and a champion for equity. And so we have a website, edtechequity.org. We also have a Twitter account, which is edtech at EdTech Equity. You can follow our journey there. Over the next month, we're going to be producing several sort of policy outputs and recommendations for how schools and ed tech companies can think more holistically about the technology that they're using and measuring on its sort of score of equity. We're focusing on that from a racial bias perspective, meaning can you actually start to vet the technologies that you're using in your school uh, and mitigate for the racial bias that they could be perpetuating? And on the company side, can you design and develop products with inclusion in mind and thinking more readily about how to mitigate and combat what racial bias can come into the ideation all the way through the implementation of an education technology product. So doing that is a very deep passion for me, and I think equity is my life's work. I'm currently working on projects that are equity in education, equity in fair housing loans for women, equity in the access to capital for startup founders of color, and access to knowledge and resources that companies need. I could do a whole interview on my thoughts on what we need in terms of where we are as Black folks in ideation, right? Like I get the whole venture capital and like pre-seed, and like we got to get money, but we also need to get the ideas built out, right? Like we need to get from the brain to the MVP to the customer and then to the money, right? So that's a whole nother session for another day. But
Is that a Madison Jacob preview part two?
that's a
CBCT
Madison
interview.
Jacobs part too, and I know a lot of really good people in that space too.
Perfect.
Not just working in California, but other incredible markets for startups like Atlanta and New York and other places where Black people are building incredible technology companies. But I think that equity is what I care most about in the world. So most of my projects are focused on that. I'm also a founder myself. So like I talked about a little bit earlier, I'm really interested in augmented reality and sort of its adoption in the mainstream. And so I think it is a tool that could be leveraged for what is pretty incredible community engagement. And so I'm working around some projects in that space. But yeah, I just am, when I think about what I care about and what I'm doing and how I focus my energy and time, because I feel like all of us could do 100 things, right? And, Black folks, it's like we do 1,000, right? Everybody else is harder. We do 1,000. It's like we have a job, we got two businesses, we gotta be over here at this event.
Right.
And then we at the event talking to everybody about this one business. Then we got to go to the other event and talk about our actual job. Then we got to go to the other event and talk about how our actual job helped us start this business. It's
Right.
too much,
Yeah,
right?
it's a lot.
So it's a lot, and we burnt out. And so burnout is a real thing, by the way. Like self-care, I try to prioritize. I don't try, I do prioritize self-care. And 5 years ago, I became a yoga teacher, actually. And so yoga has been a big part of how I navigate what is can be very tough and stressful days in the technology industry and in the startup ecosystem and in entrepreneurship. But I think that for me, I'm just always thinking to myself, does this project that I'm working on, or does this business, or does this idea, or does this even this conversation that I'm having with another human being, does it promote equity in the world? And if not, I think differently about prioritizing that thing.
Wow. So I hate to backtrack a little, but what is the difference? We were talking earlier. We had a conversation. I think it was last week, and you mentioned there was a difference between a startup and a small business.
Yeah,
What
right.
can you identify those differences?
Dang, that's a hard. Dang, you got me on the spot right now. So yeah, I think to like, how would I say this in the like simplest way? Because this is a question that gets asked a lot, and the companies kind of you know fundamentally operate differently in the terms of how you sort of get up and going. I'm trying to think how I would answer this question, Mike.
Mhm.
So I think if I had to sort of delineate the difference between the two,
Mhm.
for me, the main word that comes up is scale, right? So like the companies that have a very large scale business model, like they have a scalable business model, typically a lot of times, actually this isn't true anymore. I think earlier on, at least when startups were starting, it was like companies that were doing things for like the first time ever,
Mhm.
right? Like
Right, right.
social networking was like, it's like, oh, Facebook is like, there's nothing that's ever been like that
Right.
before. So that used to be kind of a mandate or kind of a definition of a startup. But for me, I really think about scale. Is this company sort of viably scalable into the ether?
Mhm.
For example, what I mean by that is like if you're thinking about software as a service, or you're thinking about an app that millions and millions of people can use, these are businesses that have immense and enormous scale. Whereas a small business is serving a specific, certain community of users, and they won't typically scale beyond that, right? So it's like, and I'm talking about also in terms of like, I work predominantly in technology startups. So for me, there are startups that play in other worlds that aren't tech. But when I think about technology startups, I think about technology that has sort of viable infinite scale, right? And it can just go and go and go. Whereas a small business, I'm thinking about, the champions of, and I think, by the way, like, again, just like I said, startup, the old definition of startup was like something new. The old definition of small business was like brick and mortar. Like that's like not the case anymore. Like where some startups that are e-commerce have a significant scale. Some brick and mortar businesses have e-commerce elements to them, and they're a small business serving just residents in Sacramento, right? That doesn't mean that they're not tech enabled or that they're not leveraging technology to build their business. So that's kind of like the simple way that I see the difference too. I think the way that you think about capital or raising funds is significantly different, because you're talking about VC or venture capital in the startup world, which is people are investing in companies for that scale that they're going to see as a win. Whereas a small business is highly successful if they have like the same 5,000 repeat customers every week, right? They're not going to scale to 100,000 customers. They don't need to do that. That's not their business model. And they don't need to have people investing in their business to make money based off the scale return. They just have to keep the doors open and make money for themselves and run a really impeccable, amazing business and serve their portion of users, right? So, or customers or whatever you want to use the term that you want to use there. I grew up in a family of when I say entrepreneurs, small business owners. My grandparents owned like a printing business. Like once upon a time, Kinko's was not a thing. Vistaprint.com was not a thing. Like if you wanted a business card or a flyer or something to promote, you had to go to a shop and have it printed.
Right.
That is like, I actually grew up in a shop like that. My mom again was a personal trainer. My mom was a small business owner. She can't scale her personal training. Well, she could. Well, now she could scale her personal training through internet, right? Through an educational tool online, and boom, there you go. That's a whole different situation, right? So the lines have been so blurred because of technology, right? But my mom was a small business owner and a fitness business that she had, and my uncle had owned a jewelry business for a while, and then he owned a financial services business. And so I think that like it's always been sort of in my blood to love and to understand entrepreneurship in its many forms. And at the end of the day, call it startup, call it small business, call it whatever it is. when you have this makeup inside of you that is the ability to ideate something that people need and to see that through to fruition, I think is one of the most powerful experiences of a lifetime. And I like encourage everybody I know to feel and go through that experience. Like, and by the way, entrepreneurship does not mean, in my opinion, this might be a provocative thing to say, but creating something, even if you sell it to one person, is entrepreneurship. I just start telling people, like, you want to be an entrepreneur tomorrow, create something that you feel like somebody needs, even if that is just you and your friends, and give it to them and get their feedback and test it. See what they say, then iterate on your idea. You are an entrepreneur. So I think that, like, you know, getting people to understand that, like, at least in the Black community, the power and agency that can be created from two very specific things: acquisition of wealth through real estate and acquiring of land, which they have made that really hard for us, right? The second option, the second thing that comes to my head is starting a business, because this is the opportunity that you actually have to own and operate in your own mind and vision. And there's not many times in your life where you get the opportunity to do that. And so that's why I think I feel so passionate about not just continuing to do entrepreneurial things in my life personally, but also to empower others to be able to take that journey and get the things that they need to see that path through.
Okay. Do you have any suggestions or resources that you would be willing to give to the people that are watching this, that are have a small business and want to scale up, or have a small business, any type of resources for small businesses?
Yeah, 100%. So this is where I get to plug my work at Google. I would say for technology startups, you can go to startup.google.com. That's the kind of first point access to, you know, seeing all the things that Google offers to kind of level the playing field for startup founders. We are doing a ton of work at Google with Black founders. So I'll give my plug also for my most favorite program of the year that I participate in every year. We'll be probably opening applications up sometime in the summer. It's called Black Founders Exchange, and it's a program that we do once a year in Durham, North Carolina, where Black startup founders, tech founders from all over United States, Caribbean, other places apply to be chosen as one of the 10 companies that we bring to do deep mentorship over the course of a week with experts from Google. So technology experts, marketing experts, go-to-market strategists, branding strategists, moral support from Black people, because building a business is hard.
Right.
Like, everything that you can imagine to facilitate an environment where we can help Black founders succeed. I think I said exceed instead of succeed, but both of those terms. We do that, and it's an amazing program, and I'm so privileged to be a part of it. So Black Founders Exchange, it's actually run in partnership with our super amazing co-working space in Durham, which is called American Underground. And so we do that, and startups from all over apply. We can bring startups from California. We can bring startups from Sacramento to, you know, participate in this program. So that's one thing that I love very much. I will also throw out my personal email address. Like, really, that's crazy. But if anybody wants to email me, they can email me at Madisonrjacobs. That's my personal email address. Ray is my middle name, so that R is my middle initial. And you could probably put that in the little bio thing that's underneath it when you post this interview. But I just am a wealth of a lot of, I like to make connections. I'm kind of like my girl Mariah that you just recently interviewed. Mariah is one of the most fantastic. Shout out to Mariah. Anybody that lives in Sacramento and doesn't know Mariah and is like a Black person, like, you need to know Mariah. She's the best person I know, honestly. But she is such an amazing connector, and I think I have that same passion as well. And so sometimes people's contacts or I have a running Rolodex of startup founders of color in my head. And so sometimes people email me and say, oh, Madison, do you know anybody that works in, I don't know, that is doing stuff with blockchain? And I'm like, oh, actually, yep, let me pull out my Rolodex. I know this founder, this founder, this founder. And so I'm really good at that kind of stuff. And also I'm really good at digging out and finding like free tools and resources, especially for marketing. So, how can you use stuff that's free? How can you use Google Docs? How can you use Google Forms? How can you do hacks in Gmail to kind of scale a little bit before you have to buy a tool like a Constant Contact or a MailChimp or something like that. So I don't know that off the top of my head, but anybody is free to email me with questions that they have, and I would be happy to point them towards resources that I know of.
Wow, that's outstanding. I might be shooting you a couple of emails.
Yes, shoot me some emails.
Okay. Is it?
Hey, I might regret that. I'm gonna have to build like a chat bot or something. Just specifically to respond to the emails I'm now getting from the chamber.
Right.
Like, okay, let me go. I'm gonna chat bot that, and then so I can answer everybody else's email.
Okay. Is there anything else that you would like everyone to know? Any motivation or inspiration you have?
Yeah, just pursue what you love. I think that's what I've actually I've been at Google for about 4 years, and taking this time that I've taken to take a leap into a world that's so foreign to me, and policy and politics is something that is not something that I studied or something that I intimately understand, but sort of taking this leap and realizing that there's a huge world out there, and there's so many things there's so many decisions that are made in the policy process that affect us as individuals, and how we have to get more involved in that has really just helped. Taking the sort of break, it's not really a break because I'm working full time right now in my fellowship, but it's kind of like a mental break that reminds myself that you can like get out of your comfort zone in pursuit of things that really matter to you and things that you love. And so I encourage people to continue to question themselves on, why am I in my box today? And how can I step out of it, if even just for the day? And what will that shake up or awaken inside of me?
Well, Madison, we definitely appreciate you coming on Keys to Success today. It gave us a plethora of information to work with and resources, so we're forever grateful.
Thank you so much. It was so great talking with you today.
All right.